Sensory processing disorder. What is a sensory process? The brain is constantly receiving sensory messages from the body. The brain then has to process all these messages and respond with useful motor responses or behavioural reactions. The brain receives information about the environment. The sun is bright, it's hot outside. This information is processed and the brain can then tell the body to remove the jumper. Processing sensory information correctly is important for self-preservation too. Seeing a car and hearing the engine will cause the brain to ask the body to stop and not walk into the road. The brain receives many different sensory messages all the time, whether we are just sat on a chair reading a book or standing on one leg drinking a cup of tea. For us to be able to function in an appropriate way, we need all these messages to be correctly processed and acted upon by the brain. Sensory processing disorder is when the brain receives sensory information but is unable to process it correctly and does not provide the body with the correct sensory response. The brain may tell the body that a sound is louder than it is, or that the space between the foot and the floor is closer than it is. When too much sensory information is received at once, such as temperatures, sounds, smells, and textures of clothing, the brain is unable to prioritize which information is important and needs to be acted upon by the body, and which information can be ignored. This results in the body going into sensory overload due to experiencing all sensory reactions at once. Sensory processing disorder is an umbrella term used to cover a variety of neurodevelopmental disabilities, such as sensory over-responsivity. Sounds are too loud. Bright light is painful. Clothing labels can feel like cacti. Sensory under-responsivity is a very slow processing of information and the ability to react to it. Dyspraxia, being clumsy and having poor coordination and lack of spatial awareness. Sensory seeking, the need for constant sensory feedback, the high need to chew or bite things, and an inability just to sit still. What treatment is there for sensory processing disorder? As with all treatments linked to neurological development, early intervention is the key. Taking advantage of young brains' willingness to be moulded, the first step is to observe behaviours in various settings, at home, and in school, and in the community, to try and establish which sensory processes are being affected. A GP can then refer the child to an occupational therapist, whose job it is to help re-establish the broken neurological connectors within the brain. To do this, the occupational therapist will observe the child, set some activities to be completed to get a better understanding of the child's sensory needs. The occupational therapist will then suggest activities to strengthen core body muscles or to help desensitize to a particular object or group of objects. Brushing and deep pressure is an effective way of providing for these sensory needs. How can schools help? Provide a quiet space for the child to retreat to if all gets too much. This will allow the child time to process information and avoid sensory overload, which can be painful, scary, and embarrassing for the child. The school should follow the activities suggested by the occupational therapist. Starting the school day with a sensory circuit can help the child's brain process information more effectively.